Hey folks, how's it going? Realm Gaming here, back into the video. In today's episode, we're going to be going over the Windwalker Monk for Season 4 of Dragonflight. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, just so you don't miss any future videos. Alright, let's get into some of the pros and cons of Windwalker Monk. So, the first pro is they are very versatile. So, this normally means that they are good at a lot of things, but they're not the best at anything. So, we do bring a lot of control to the dungeon. Whether that's like Ring of Peace, whether that's paralysis, something like sweeping leg kick is also going to be very strong as well for some Mythic Plus content. We have a great damage interrupt. We have a pretty balanced damage profile. So overall, we can pretty much do anything we want as a Windwalker Monk. The only thing we do not have is like a battle res, and we do not have a lust. So that is something I did kind of forget in the cons of this video. But there are so many classes, so many specs that do bring this utility. It's not a major con in my opinion. So we also have really good mobility, right? We got Tiger's Lust. We have Roll. We also have things like Transcendence that we can utilize to swap our position. So in that regard, you get a lot of extra chances if you find yourself out of position a lot. You can see here I put Versatile on here twice, just act like that's not even there. We also have huge burst and cleave damage. And this is one of the main reasons that I personally enjoy to play Windwalker Monk, is just because they have such a satisfying AoE damage profile. I also think the rotation flows very smoothly, right? Your spinning crane kick has a small channel time. Your Fist of Fury has a small channel time. So it's nothing like playing Fury Warrior or anything crazy like that, right? You don't have carpal tunnel at the end of the dungeon. It's just very chill and it flows very nicely. And then down here at the very bottom, can switch targets very easily. I think what I'm trying to say is the number of mobs don't really affect our damage profile or damage output quite as much as other classes. For example, something like Destruction Warlock, where they have like 2 mobs in a pack, they're going to come out on top, right? Because of the way Chaos Bolt works and having Havoc up on 2 separate targets, they're going to pull way ahead. But Windwalker Monk doesn't have anything like that in our kit. And thankfully, that just kind of helps make the damage rotation a little bit easier. Going into cons, historically speaking, at least in Dragonflight, right, we've not been super great in single target damage, and then we never seem to scale super well into expansions either. Now, we are getting a huge class overhaul in War Within, so I'm really excited about that. There's a ton of changes coming to just Monk in general. But this seems to happen every single expansion where they kind of hype us up at the start and then kind of forget about us towards the end. So, and then of course the invisible con here that I did forget to add, we do not have any sort of like major group utility like a Lust or a Battle Res. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about where we think Windwalker Monk might stand going into Season 4, their tier set, and then some of the changes that Windwalker was presented with in 10.2.6. Okay, so the community voted on previous season's tier sets, and the winning tier set, of course, gets carried over into Season 4. So the winning set that the community voted on was this Season 1 set here. So the 2 set, Fist of Fury, increase the damage done of your next 2 rising kicks or spinning crane kicks by 30%. And then the 4 set bonus, Fist of Fury, now instead enhances your next 3 rising sun kicks or spinning crane kicks, and enhanced kicks increase the damage your next Fist of Fury deals by 5%, stacking up to 3 times. So it looks like this tier set did get a little bump in 10.2.6. So the 30% bonus that you're seeing here on the 2 set was bumped up to 40%. And then the 5% bonus that you're seeing here was bumped up to 7%. So outside of that, we didn't see hardly any changes for Windwalker Monk going into Season 4, which is pretty universal for most specs. So we're going to assume, right, that Windwalker Monk is still going to be sitting in this sort of B-, B+ tier. So it's definitely not terrible. There were times earlier in Dragonflight where Windwalker Monk was down here in the C and D tier, so we have been bumped up a little bit. So I do think that we are viable going into Season 4. Now, of course, one thing we don't bring is that crazy utility, which of course is why you're going to see Balanced Druid up at the top, Shadow Priest with their Power Infusion, Augmentation Evoker, Fire Mages up here just with Lust and being able to play around Combustion. These specs just have more going for them than Windwalker, unfortunately. So that doesn't mean Windwalker's bad, it just means in coordinated group play, they are not as strong as some of the specs up here. Okay, so big disclaimer here, right? Always sim your character for your best stats using something like Raid Bots or Simulation Craft. It all just kind of depends, But for the most part, this is the general stat priority that you're going to be going for. So let's start with haste here at the bottom. Haste is good because it's going to reduce the CDR of some of our main abilities. And haste is typically going to scale better on something like a dot class instead of a burst class like Windwalker Monk. So it just doesn't synergize with our kit super well. And then a little bit better than that, we have our mastery, and it's not necessarily bad in like a Mythic Plus environment, but it just doesn't scale as well as versatility and critical strike for us. So critical strike is just going to kind of give us more flat damage. And since we, again, are a bursty spec, versatility and critical strike just work better for us than mastery. So let's also talk about our mastery really quick here, combo strikes. So your abilities deal 10% more damage when they're not a repeat of the previous ability. So this means for the most part, you don't ever want to be casting the same ability twice in a row. We'll get into that a little bit more once we go into the rotation. But if you are not familiar with Windwalker Monk, that's what our mastery is. Now, versatility and critical strike, we're going to weigh those both equal to each other. So versatility is going to be favored in like really high keys where you're not able to survive. You can pick up some versatility to get that damage reduction. Or if you're really just trying to pump out more damage, you can go something like critical strike. Just know that diminishing returns do start to happen at about 30%. So you don't want to go over 30% on either of these. Okay, let's talk a little bit about core abilities here. We have Spinning Crane Kick. This is probably going to be your main spender, and you can see here it costs 2 chi. So Windwalker Monk kind of works off this chi system, and you can build it through certain abilities. Tiger Palm is one of them, and then you spin that chi on more hard-hitting abilities, such as something like Spinning Crane Kick or Rising Sun Kick. So Spinning Crane Kick, in my opinion, is what makes the spec flow so well. It's a channeled ability, so it's not like you're just spamming a button over and over. You have a couple seconds to breathe after you press the button, and this is going to be your main AoE spell. We also have Tiger Palm over here on the right. You can see it costs 50 energy. We're also based off an energy system, so you can't just go in here and necessarily spam Tiger Palms, right, to build up a whole bunch of chi and then spend it. You got to kind of play around that energy. So you can see down here, it reduces the remaining cooldown on your brews by 1 second, and then it also has an 8% chance to make your next blackout kick cost no chi. So blackout kick is going to cost 3 chi, so kick with a blast of chi energy, dealing X amount of attack power as physical damage. So blackout kick is not super strong by itself necessarily, but Tiger Palm can actually buff blackout kick, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a bit. But just know, high level through a talent, Tiger Palm will make you blackout kick multiple times if you Tiger Palm before a blackout kick. Now for single target, we have Rising Sun Kick. This is on a 10-second cooldown. You want to keep this on cooldown as much as you possibly can. This is your main single target ability. You can see it costs 2 chi. It's on a 10-second cooldown. It does a lot of burst damage just in one ability here. And then down here, we have another channeled ability called Fist of Fury. It costs 3 chi. This is on a 24-second cooldown. Then just kind of reading it out here, it pummels all targets in front of you, dealing X amount of physical damage to your primary target, and then X amount of damage to all other enemies over 4 seconds. So this is like an area of effect spell. We'll use it in both single target and AoE scenarios. This deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets, and this can also be channeled while moving, very similar to Spinning Crane Kick. So another really fun ability there. So this is going to be your core abilities. Let's go ahead and move on to cooldowns now. Your first major cooldown is going to be Touch of Death. And Touch of Death is going to kind of work as an execute. It doesn't necessarily execute your target, but it does a ton of damage if your target is under a specific health threshold. So by itself, it's not super strong because it does a lot of damage, but it's kind of on a high cooldown. But when you pair it with all these other talents here on the right, Touch of Death does become a very major cooldown for us. So let's just read it out here real quick. Inflict mortal damage on an enemy, causing their target to take damage equal to 35% of your max health after 8 seconds, reduced against players. During the 8-second duration, 10% of all other damage you deal to the target will be added to the final damage dealt. So you can already tell, but just by looking at this 35% of your own maximum health that deals in damage, you can tell it does a ton of damage, right? Now, obviously, that's reduced in PvP because that would be absolutely broken. But in PvE, it's not reduced, which means this becomes an extremely hard-hitting ability by itself. Then when you pair it with these talents over here on the right, it just gets even crazier. Now, a lot of people don't like playing around Touch of Death because it can be kind of hard to get off, and if you don't utilize it properly, it will affect your overall damage a lot. So let's just go ahead and read over these talents. We got Meridian Strikes. When you combo strike, the cooldown of Touch of Death is reduced by 0.35 seconds, and then Touch of Death deals an additional 15% damage. So that's really good, right? It's going to reduce our 2-minute cooldown here each time we combo strike, so that just kind of adds some value to our mastery there. So we got reduced CDR here. Under Forbidden Technique, Touch of Death deals 20% increased damage and can be used a second time within 5 seconds before its cooldown is triggered. So that means if you press this button twice in a row, within 5 seconds, it will go off twice. So basically, we just multiplied this ability times 2. Plus, we're getting CDR on it. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we got Fatal Flying Guillotine. So Touch of Death strikes up to 4 additional nearby targets. This Touch of Death is always an improved Touch of Death. So this turns Touch of Death into an AoE ability. So kind of again, going back to my previous statement, Touch of Death by itself isn't super crazy, but when you add all these talents that kind of buff it, it does become a very strong cooldown for us. So down here we have Storm, Earth, and Fire, split into 3 elemental spirits for 15 seconds, each spirit dealing 42% of normal damage and healing. You directly control the Storm Spirit, while Earth and Fire Spirits mimic your attacks on nearby enemies. While active, casting Storm, Earth, and Fire again will cause the spirits to fixate on your target. So this is basically going to send out some clones of you, and they're going to kind of mimic your abilities. So this is really strong, right? You can use Storm, Earth, and Fire, and then pair that with something like Touch of Death, and they will mimic your Touch of Death. They'll mimic your Spinning Crane Kick, your Fist of Fury. I mean, pretty much anything. So you want to be using this with the rest of your cooldowns because they're going to be mimicking all that damage. It's going to give you an exponential damage increase. You also want to be using this during Lust. Again, you get 2 charges of this, and each charge is on a 1.5 minute recharge time. All right, then some more cooldowns here. We got Summon White Tiger Statue. Pretty boring talent. You just put it on the ground. It pulses AoE damage. It's on a 2-minute cooldown. Unfortunately, there's nothing else better that we can take at the moment, so we're still going into this Tiger Statue. Another really strong ability we have is Strike of the Windlord. It costs 2 chi, and it's on a 40-second cooldown. Now, one thing to note is, of course, your Storm, Earth, and Fire from earlier will mimic this. So pairing those 2 up can be very strong. We also have a talent here called Thunder Fist. So Strike of the Windlord grants you a stack of Thunder Fist for each enemy struck. Thunder Fist discharges upon melee strikes, dealing X amount of nature damage. So this, again, does a ton of damage. I try to utilize this around trinkets, around Storm, Earth, and Fire, whatever I can to get the most value out of this. And then finally down here at the bottom, we have Invoke Schwinn, the White Tiger. And by itself, it's a strong talent, but what really makes it strong is this Invoker's Delight. You gain 33% haste for 20 seconds after summoning your Celestial. So this is crazy because this is basically a bloodlust for you every 2 minutes. Now, one thing you will notice is your single target damage will fall off a ton without your White Tiger up. And that's going to be mainly due to not having access to Invoker's Delight. So if you're in a Mythic Plus dungeon, obviously you're going to be using it on cooldown as much as you possibly can, but you want to try to time it to where this lines up with the boss pool. Okay, and these are the Mythic Plus talents that we're going to be running. I will put a link in the description so you can import them. All right, guys, and if you get anything from this video at all, I want it to be this slide right here, because outside of talents, outside of abilities, outside of everything else, this is what Windwalker kind of comes down to, is this slide right here. So the whole point of Windwalker Monk is to kind of tab through individual targets and hit them at least 1 time. So let's go back to combo strikes down here at the bottom. We already talked about this, but a lot of things kind of synergize with combo strikes, right? So your abilities deal 10% more damage when they're not a repeat of the previous ability. So that tells us right there, we don't want to be casting the same ability over and over. So we don't want to be going into a pack and just kind of spamming Spinning Crane Kick. So Blizzard really tries to incentivize us not to do that through combo strikes, and then also through Mark of the Crane. Spinning Crane Kick's damage is increased by 18% for each unique target that you've struck in the last 20 seconds with Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, or Rising Sun, stacks up to 5 times. So really what you want to be doing is you want to be weaving Tiger Palms, Blackout Kicks, Rising Sun Kicks between the group that you're fighting. And you want to build up this Mark of the Crane stacks, and you also want to build up the Combo Strike stacks. And then when you get up to 5 stacks of Mark of the Crane, then that's when you want to do a Spinning Crane Kick. So a lot kind of going on there, but just know you don't ever want to be hitting the same target over and over. Obviously on a boss, there's nothing you can do about that, but you also don't want to be hitting the same ability over and over. Now, another incentive they give us down here is in the bottom left, hit combo. Each successive attack that triggers combo strikes, mastery over here, in a row grants 1% increased damage, stacking up to 6 times. So as long as you're not repeating the same ability, you're going to be getting combo strikes and hit combo for 16% more damage. Now on top of that, we get another incentive here, Fury of Schwinn. Your combo strikes, going back to our mastery, grants a 1% chance for your next Fist of Fury to grant 612 haste and invoke Schwinn the White Tiger for 8 seconds. So the more and more we proc combo strikes, the more and more of a chance we got to proc this. So those 4 abilities that we just kind of went over is the core of Windwalker Monk. There is one more talent here. I'm on the wrong talent set, but we do take it. It's called Dance of Chi-Ji. We didn't go over that yet, but spending Chi has a chance to make your next Spinning Crane Kick free and deal an additional 300% damage. So when we go and talk about the damage priority here in a bit, the priority of the abilities that we use, just remember Dance of Chi-Ji is going to turn your Spinning Crane Kick into an insanely hard hitting ability. So you will know when this procs because Spinning Crane Kick, again, which is this ability here, it has the same icon as this ability. It will glow yellow, and it's also going to make a noise. So you'll be able to tell when Spinning Crane Kick does proc. When that procs, that is a very high priority ability. All right, then last thing I want to talk about here is Teachings of the Monastery and Shadowboxing Treads. So Teachings of the Monastery, Tiger Palm causes your next Blackout Kick to strike an additional time, stacking up to 3. And then Blackout Kick has a 12% chance to reset the remaining cooldown on a Rising Sun Kick. So that exponentially increases the value of our Blackout Kick as long as we're Tiger Palming between them. That way we get like 4 casts of Blackout Kick, right? Now that's really good for single target, but what about AoE, right? Blackout Kick's just a single target spell. Well, if you take the Shadowboxing Treads talent, which we do, Blackout Kick now deals 50% increased damage and it strikes 2 additional targets. So all those additional kicks that you're getting out of Teaching of the Monastery also applies to Shadowboxing Tread, and it makes it this huge AoE kick. So it's basically like 4 Blackout Kicks in a row, and it's hitting 3 different targets at once. So those are some very key talents there. Let's go ahead and talk about rotation. It's not really rotation, it's more of a priority system. That's kind of what most rotations are nowadays. It's just based on the priority of your unique given situation. So the first 2 or 3 here are pretty obvious. Touch of Death is a huge cooldown. You're going to be using it anytime it's available, anytime it's glowing, press it. We also have our White Tiger here as well. We want to get that big haste buff that we were talking about earlier from our tigers. So we want to be using this on cooldown as much as possible. We want to try to line it up with a boss fight because you will notice your damage will dip a lot if you don't have your tigers up. Outside of that, we always want to make it a priority to be generating combo points. So if you are high on energy and you're under 5 combo points, go ahead and start generating some so that we can use those combo points on stronger abilities down here below. Then that Chi-Ji proc we were talking about, that's going to be your next priority. That's going to take priority over any of these cooldowns here. Whenever you see it proc, it honestly even takes priority, in my opinion, over Tiger Palm. These two could probably be interchanged between each other, but this is extremely important. It's free. It doesn't cast any sort of combo points to use. It does a whole bunch of damage. There's no reason not to press it when it procs. Then we have our Strike of the Windlord. Does a whole bunch of damage. It's on a 40-second cooldown. Does high single target and AoE damage. Be using that bad boy on cooldown. We got Fist of Fury as well. Now remember, with our tier set, we do get that stacking bonus, so you want to be using this at 3 stacks. But this is also something, you don't want to think about too much. Just be using it pretty much on cooldown. But at 3 stacks, it's of course going to be stronger. We have Blackout Kick as well. You're going to be using this based off of Teachings of the Monastery when you get high stacks on that. Then down here at the very bottom, we have Spinning Crane Kick. And I'm just now noticing here, I did not add a 6, 7, 8, 9, but just know, 5, 6 is Fist of Fury, 7 Blackout, 8 Rising Sun, 9 Spinning Crane Kick. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.